This is FX Radio. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And joining us on the line from Seattle today is none other than Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, co-author of the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine and also the textbook and the Handbook of Natural Medicines with Dr. Michael Murray. Joe is also a physician, educator, researcher, and he's been an expert spokesman for decades. He's a founding president of Bastyr University, one of the preeminent naturopathic universities in the world. He's the editor-in-chief of Integrative Medicine, a clinician's journal, that's IMCJ. And he's also the chair board of BioClinic Naturals and vice president of the board of the Institute of Functional Medicine, the IFM. So, Joe, welcome so much to FX Medicine Podcast.
Thank you.
Joe, I'm very excited because next year you'll be joining us at the 2015 Bioceutical Symposium. And I've been waiting a long time to speak to you in person to pick your brain. Because we've seen, I've met Michael Murray and I've been able to pick his brain about a lot of things, but I've never had the opportunity to meet you. So, Joe, let's start right back at your education because you founded Bastyr University. What was beforehand?
Well, beforehand was basically just about the death of the profession in the United States. I graduated in 1975, and the year before me, and by the way, it was the last naturopathic college in all of North America called National College of Naturopathic Medicine. Mm-hmm. And the year before me, nobody graduated.
Wow.
So it's like the profession, you might say, technically gasps for a year before it's starting to kick out some new people. But the challenge was not only that there was only one school left, but the profession had been so successfully stomped down by the AMA, American Medical Association, that it was just very, very weak. There were only 6 states that licensed naturopathic doctors. The school had so few students that our classes were almost all taught by naturopathic doctors on a volunteer basis just to keep the medicine alive. So the education, while it had good clinical parts, academically was very, very challenged because they weren't professional educators.
Yeah.
So when I finally graduated in 1975, went to a 4-year program, I realized that we had to do this better. That while natural medicine has such brilliance in understanding why people were sick and how to help them become healthy, we needed to come to modern standards of education and research, clinical practice, textbooks. We had to remake the whole profession because while the philosophy was great, the implementation was really quite faulty.
Mm-hmm. And so tell me about the evolution then of Bastyr University. What happened?
When I graduated in 75, I got myself elected to the Board of Trustees of NCNM. And I made a pledge to the student body that I would spend 2 years trying to get the school up to modern standards. Now, at that point, the school had moved from Seattle to Portland. Mm-hmm. And so I, every month, would drive down to Portland to have board meetings. And I tried for 2 years, and I could not get them out of a bunker mentality. They were afraid to raise their head above the foxhole because conventional medicine kept lopping it off.
Yeah.
So I told the students I would spend 2 years trying to get the school to modern standards. They wouldn't do it. So I said, okay, I'm going to go start my own school. So
wow, that's no small undertaking.
So I mentioned this to my receptionist. She mentioned it to one of my grateful patients. And I then got together with my friends, Dr. Les Griffith and Dr. Bill Mitchell, get them to join me. And then my grateful patient heard about what we were doing and said, well, here is a check for $200. I want to support what you're going to do.
Wow.
So with $200, I founded what was then called John Bastyr College of Naturopathic Medicine.
And who's John Bastyr?
So John Bastyr was my beloved teacher. So John Bastyr was kind of the North American expert in naturopathic medicine. He practiced in Seattle, and for many years he was one of only a handful of doctors in all of Washington State practicing this medicine.
Gosh.
But what made him so special, and this is something I always tell my students, I said, what made Dr. Bastyr so special was that he was a healer and a physician. So he was a healer in that he had this remarkable ability to get people to believe in their ability to become healthy. Mm-hmm. But he also was technically very, very, very competent. So he studied assiduously and was just very, very good. So I tell my students when I meet them the first year, I say, okay, now, why do we name this after John Bastyr? And I said, there's two things I want you to always remember. Number one is always touch your patient, let them know that you care. And second, always study. Every day, make sure you get better, because ultimately, those patients are dependent upon you to help them become healthy. So that's what made him so special, a healer and a physician.
Well, I think we can take that to Australia as well. I think we should embrace those two rules into our hearts and practices. So, Joe, you're still in practice today, though, but you've seen huge developments. Tell me what's happened.
Not technically. So I don't have an office anymore because I'm too busy teaching and doing research and writing. But I do concierge medicine. So somehow, I guess I'll be blunt about it, wealthy people all over the world who have problems they can't find anywhere else, they find me. And so I still get to see people, just not very often. And I get some great patient histories because I'm in a unique position where I can actually spend enough time with people and they've got enough money to do the lab tests that are necessary that I can usually figure out what's wrong with them and provide them some substantial health.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I'm so excited to be hearing you speak at the 2015 Biocetical Symposium. Just for the listeners, that's going to be at the Hilton in Sydney. Please come. Tell me about what you'll be speaking on, because it's going to be quite exciting and there's some new developments.
Well, I'm also very excited to become visiting you folks because I've looked with a lot of fondness towards Australia for many years because, as you know, you have the greatest per capita number of naturopathic doctors anywhere in the world. So I think what you do is great.
Let's remember our beaches as well.
Right.
So tell me about what you'll be speaking on, Joe.
So I've always, like all of us in this field, have been interested in this whole area of toxicity and detoxification. And while I've always been aware of it, I hadn't really studied it that deeply nor looked at the research behind it. Then I had a really special experience. About 5 years ago, one of the wealthiest men in Canada asked me to come and design a wellness program for his 4,500 oil field workers. And when I said to him, well, I'd love to do that for you, but I want to run some lab tests. I want to check their nutritional status. I want to check their toxin load. I want to check some key intermediate metabolites. What's my budget? And he said, blank check.
Wow.
What do you mean blank check? He said, if you could convince me I should run this test, then I will pay for it. I said, well, that's great. So I ran the equivalent of $1,500 retail laboratory tests on 4,500 people. Gosh. So I got a lot of data. So not only did I find a lot of nutritional deficiencies, I also found a lot of toxicity. Now, your audience may be saying, well, they're oil field workers, so of course they're toxic. So these oil field workers were basically guys in the 30s, get in their pickup truck, drive out to a farm somewhere, check on a pump, make sure it's working properly, and then drive off to the next pump. They have no chemical exposure. But what they do have, which is quite interesting, is that they are, a lot of them are hobby farmers. Mm-hmm. So what was happening is I see all this toxicity in these people, and a lot of it's coming from their farming, where they're using herbicides and pesticides and synthetic fertilizers and all these things, and it was showing up in abnormalities in their bodies. So I started delving more deeply into toxicity and detoxification, and I was just stunned by the amount of research I found supporting this age-old concept, and not only research saying how these toxins damage our body, but also finding laboratory tests that were available, and also interventions. Some of them are pretty new that we can use now to actually get toxins out of people's bodies.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting ways with those people in rural areas that treat farmers is just the level of toxicity that they see. And what's interesting to me, and I'm going to mention her name, Margaret Smith. She was a real tutor to me. She gave me this diagram and she said, how do these toxins get into their bodies? And I said, what, inhaling and things like that? She said, no. What happens is the farmer sits on the truck with the bottle that they want to put the pesticide or the herbicide in. And so they hold it in there between their legs and they pour or they decant into that from the concentrate. And then what inevitably happens is it spills over the sides and lands in their groin. They get 12% absorption through their scrotum.
Oh my gosh.
I was blown away.
Yeah, really?
And that was, she showed me a diagram actually from an agricultural magazine talking about why you should be wearing protective clothing. And it was a real eye-opener to me. I'll always remember it.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to jump the gun on your lecture at the symposium, but I'd love to whet people's appetites. So a lot of people say, I already know about detoxing. I've learned about that from several sort of angles. What's new? What are you going to be talking about that's different? And what skill sets are you going to be giving people to take home and integrate into their practices?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think what's new is not only the data I have on the toxic load, but also the research on how to get toxins out. But probably more importantly is how I've very methodically gone through all the sources of toxins, how you recognize them in the body, how they damage the body, and then what to do about it. I've kind of broken the toxins into three categories, and some things I'm going to say to you may be a surprise. So I've broken into three categories. I'm calling category 1 exogenous toxins, so things from the environment. Category 2 are endogenous toxins. These are toxins produced within the body. And the third I'm going to call toxins of choice. Okay. So the first category is what you would expect: heavy metals, persistent organic pollutants, solvents, all those chemicals. Everybody, I think, is aware of the problem. I don't think they are aware about how bad it is. So, for example, if I were to tell you that a patient comes into you with diabetes, and while you would normally first think about, well, are they eating too much sugar? Are they fat, not exercising? I'm going to tell you that chemical toxins that are used as pesticides in food people eat are a better predictor of diabetes than any other factor we have today. Okay.
Wow.
People in the top 10% of toxin exposure have a 20-fold increased risk for diabetes. So I don't care how much chromium you give them, how much you get them off the sugar, how much you get them to exercise. The problem is those chemicals are insulin receptor site poisons. Mm-hmm. So the insulin receptor sites can't respond to insulin because they're being poisoned by these persistent organic pollutants. Okay. So that's one example.
Yeah.
Then the second area is endogenous. So I remember way back when I was a third-year student in naturopathic medical school back in 1974, one of my instructors, 73 actually, one of my instructors walked into the class and said, "Death begins in the colon." I said, okay, you gotta be crazy. Because at that point, I just finished basic sciences, and I knew that the gut was this semi-permeable membrane that was very carefully controlled what got into the body, and all that got into the body were nutrients, and no toxins could come into the body from what was in the gut. Well, as is typical with these old-timers, they were remarkably insightful. So I decided to create a brand new lecture, which I gave for the first time last month, called Death Begins in the Colon. Okay, grabs people's attention.
Yeah.
But as I looked into the research, I found stunning numbers. So would you be surprised if I told you that between 1/4 and 1/3 of the non-protein molecules in the blood come from bacteria in our gut?
Yeah.
Why, yes, there's 10 times as many bacteria in our gut,
yeah.
but there's 100 times as much genes in the bacteria in our guts as we have in our body. So these things, if you have good bacteria, you're producing good chemicals. If you have bad bacteria, you're producing bad chemicals. And then we have the problem that what I call permeability control. So normally in the healthy gut, we have good permeability control, so we keep out the bad stuff and let in the good stuff. Well, because of the modern diets and also inappropriate bacteria in the gut, but also another factor I'm going to tell you about in a moment, we have lost permeability control. Yeah. So whereas in the past, these may not have been so bad, all the old-timers always talked about, having healthy bacteria in the gut and eating yogurt and things like that makes sure you have healthy bacteria. The problem is not only do we have a lot of really unhealthy bacteria because of all the antibiotics, but we now have lost our ability to control what we're allowed into our body. Okay. Now, over 75% of people have excess of permeability in their gut. And the reason for it is what I'll call number 3, and that's toxins of choice. Now, you might be thinking, well, of course, alcohol. And yes, excess consumption of alcohol does increase gut permeability. But we're now seeing fascinating research with wheat. And with wheat, depending upon a person's genetic type, every time a person eats wheat with certain genetic types, it causes the gut permeability to increase out of control.
Yeah.
Okay. And it looks like 75% of Caucasian populations will respond to wheat with increased gut permeability. about 20% will have dramatic increase in gut permeability. So for the average person, gut permeability goes up for goes uncontrolled, it gets out of control for about 1 hour. For people who are called haptoglobin type 2, which is 20% of Caucasian populations, when they eat wheat, their gut permeability increases for 3 hours afterwards.
Yeah.
So it turns out that this is problematic, but it's also something we can do something about.
So you're going to be giving practitioners some practice points and some tips, some strategies about how they can return the workings of the gut permeability, including tight gut junction function.
Correct.
Yep, great.
Correct.
Very exciting research.
We'll talk about what damages the tight gut junctions, and then also research that's been shown to help regenerate the damaged gut.
So have you met or spoken with Alessandro Fasano?
I have.
Yeah.
So
Lucky man.
I first became aware of his research about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And then 2.5 years ago, heard him lecture on how he discovered the zonulin.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most interesting lectures I've ever heard. Have you heard him?
Look, I haven't heard him. I've read some of his papers, and it was just such exciting stuff. It really explains so much. So I think attendees to this symposium are going to get some real key benefits out of this.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges I had when I was in private practice is I early learned that so many of my patients with chronic disease, if I got them to stop eating wheat, rye and barley, of course, they got better, but they didn't have antibodies to wheat. So I couldn't figure out why they're getting better. There was no lab test to tell me that they're having problems with wheat. And Fasano's work with zonulin is just remarkable.
Yeah, it's groundbreaking.
Finally clarified this problem for me.
And it's just been described recently that there's this non-gluten wheat intolerance, non-gluten related wheat intolerance. So we might be barking down going down the wrong avenue if we think that it's compartmentalized to just gluten.
I fully agree. If you look at the whole grain family, we have this group of polypeptides that have a lot of similarities.
But there's so much more to this area of toxic burden. Indeed, over the last 5 years or so, I saw this 10, 15 years ago, and it was just like, yes, there's a problem with pollution. No, there isn't. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. And people would be rattling the chains, but nobody would listen. But in this last 5 years, I've seen more and more. It's like a huge groundswell that the medical authorities are now bucking up and listening, that there really is a toxic overload happening from so many different sources. We've seen contamination of flame retardants in salmon imported from Thailand. That was reported in Choice magazine in Australia. We've seen all sorts of issues with people doing home renos and the chromium copper arsenic tainted wood. There's so many issues going on.
Yes.
Talk to me about what are you seeing? What's happening with the health authorities? Right.
So I think that's a very, very good question you're asking. So up until about 5 or 6 years ago, the health authorities were basically discounting the issue of toxicity because when they looked at individual toxins, the disease correlations were not very good because a lot of these toxins have non-monotonic relationships. So in other words, if you give a person mercury toxicity, you get a nice linear relationship. The more mercury, the more toxicity.
Yeah.
But a lot of these pops, what's happening, you get what are called curvilinear relationships where a low dose may cause toxicity, a medium dose has no apparent toxicity, and then a high dose has toxicity. So we started looking at the data, it's all over the board, there's no correlations. What researchers have now done, which has become much more sophisticated, is they've done two things. One, they looked at total toxic load. With total toxic load, you get really strong correlations. They then also started looking at this curvilinear relationship, doing primarily animal models, but now finding that it works with humans as well, that indeed these toxins, if you understand the specific biochemistry of the toxin, you can now understand at what level they're going to be toxic in the body. But the bottom line is the more the toxic load, the more the problems.
What would you say to attendees to excite them to come along to the 2015 symposium?
I'm going to provide them with the scientific foundation for toxicity in its broadest concepts, the tools to measure their patient load accurately, and then what to do about it. And I'm going to talk about toxins in ways people may not think about. For example, how many people think about excessive salt consumption as a toxic in the body? Do you know when you consume excessive salt, you impair the body's ability to produce glutathione? And glutathione is what the key molecule the body produces to get rid of chemical toxins. Mm-hmm. So the higher the salt in the body, the less ability to decrease chemical toxins. I mean, there are a lot of these factors which we always kind of knew in the back of our minds. Too much salt's bad for you. Well, I can now tell you it's a significant factor in keeping toxins in people's bodies. So a lot of these facts I've found by looking at maybe 10,000 papers at this point. By the way, I'm not exaggerating. When you see the textbook of natural medicine, there's 10,000 references in the textbook of natural medicine. I've looked at a lot of research, and what's particularly fun is I've now had a chance to use it on thousands of people and see what happens. So I can tell you, when I have a mercury chelation program I'm going to tell people about. Well, I've used it on a lot of people, and I can tell you, I did before and after mercury with challenge testing. The protocol works. The mercury levels go down. And I've been giving people case histories with hard data showing how this really works.
So, Joe, you're going to be giving us handy hints and tips. What's interesting to me is that these bad health foods, if you like, or lifestyle factors that we've known about for years in medicine, but you're going to be looking at them from a different viewpoint. So they're still bad, but not in the way that we originally thought, like salt.
Correct. Yeah, I've become convinced that the toxic load in modern civilizations is now probably even more important than the nutritional deficiencies in terms of causing disease in our patients. Yeah. So I'm going to actually glutathione. I'm going to have a 1 hour lecture just on glutathione. It is so critical.
Wow. Okay. Just briefly, are you going to be covering the various antioxidant cycles and systems that we have in the body and how nutrients interplay to sort of handball between them? Only
to the degree to which a particular antioxidant system is involved in getting toxins out of the body or protecting the body from toxins. So, for example, when I talk about glutathione, I'm going to talk about glutathione actually is used by the body to pump mercury out of the brain and into the blood. And then we use mercury in regular cells to pump it out of the cells and into the blood. So I'm going to talk about mercury from the perspective of how it gets toxins out of the body and how glutathione then binds to persistent organic pollutants in phase 2 detoxification in the liver to get out to the bile. So I'll talk about from that perspective, but I'll talk about glutathione, how it recycles vitamin C and vitamin E. But this is not about antioxidants as antioxidants. It's about toxins in the body, how to get them out. Yeah, and one of the issues that I think a lot of practitioners forget about is they're caught up in a program of detoxing, quote unquote, the liver, and getting it out of the body. But a lot of toxins can have the propensity to recirculate, don't they? Yes, enterohepatic recirculation. So here's an example of one of my lectures when I'm talking about mercury. The body is actually very good at getting rid of mercury, and in the healthy person, they excrete about 1% of the body load of mercury into the gut every day. The problem is we reabsorb 99% of it. Now, how come? Why is our body so incredibly brilliant and wonderful? Goes through all this effort to get rid of this mercury and then just reabsorbs it. Well, because as we evolved as a species, we had 100, 150 grams of fiber in our diet every day. Now, Western civilizations, you have about 10 to 15 grams of fiber in the day. So the body's expecting fiber there to bind to the chemicals being excreted from the liver. And we're not just talking about mercury. You also have the persistent organic pollutants. So I'll be talking about how fiber is so critical. And for those who don't even want to use dietary supplements, and we have some patients like that, and we do some practitioners like that, if all you do is increase the fiber in the patient's diet substantially, not just 10 to 15 grams, but get up to 50 grams if you can, that in itself will greatly facilitate the body's ability to get rid of toxins. There are more aggressive ways of doing it, but that in itself, just helping the body do what it wants, what it's trying to do, is a very effective strategy. And you'll be talking about this to the delegates at the symposium, yeah? I will. Brilliant. I, for one, seriously can't wait to hear you impart your decades of practice and expertise in healing patients, Joe. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you at the 2015 symposium in April next year. Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to being there, and I appreciate your kind compliments. Cheers, Joe. This is FX Radio. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook.